Your personality creates your personal reality. That's it. And your personality is made up of how you think, how you act, and how you feel. So the present personality who's listening to this podcast has created the present personal reality called their life. Which means then if you want to change your life, you want to create a new personal reality, you're going to have to change your personality. You're going to have to change because nothing changes in your life until you change. So what is the understanding of change? So we've spent over 10 years studying a way to explain what change is, because if you think 60 to 70,000 thoughts, 90% of those thoughts are the same thoughts as the day before, you're in trouble, because the same thoughts will lead to the same choices will lead to the same behaviors create the same experiences, and the same experiences produce those very same emotions, and those same emotions influence our same thoughts and our biology. Everything stays the same because we're the same. I gotta change my personality. Well, this concept called metacognition, the seat of our conscience, our frontal lobe, allows us to think about what we're thinking about, to notice how we're behaving, and to become aware of how we're feeling. And the repetition of thinking, acting, and feeling in the same way causes our brain to become hardwired into very specific neural patterns, right? So the moment we become conscious of those thoughts, the moment we become aware of those behaviors, the moment we notice those feelings, we're no longer the program. In fact, we're the consciousness observing the program, and that's the first step to change.
Need motivation?
Watch your top 10 with Believe Nation.
Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and I make these videos because you are probably the most ambitious person in your circle, but you know you're capable of more, and you get that push by surrounding yourself with the best. So today, let's learn from one of the best, Joe Dispenza, and my take on his top 10 rules of success. Enjoy. Rule number 2, be present.
Look, people can create all kinds of wealth, Ed. They can create all kinds of abundance. They can have the cars, the homes, and everything. But if they can't be present to enjoy them, I've sat with billionaires and they've looked me in the eye and said, "We're all miserable.
Same here.
We're all miserable." And so then, at what point do you have to wait to change? Does it have to be that lowest point, or can you learn and change in a state of joy and inspiration instead of pain and suffering? And that becomes the art, right? So then to change then is to be greater than the habituations, the drives, and the emotions that have been conditioned in the body. To change is to be greater than the conditions in our environment, that every person, every object, everything in our life has a neurological network associated with them. They're knowns because we've experienced them, and we have an emotion associated with them. So if you're not being defined by a vision of the future, you're left with the memories of the past, and you see your ex, and you're going to see your ex through the memory of your past neurologically, and that's going to elicit an emotional response. And you're thinking and feeling equal to your environment, your life's not going to change. So then the next question is, how could I overcome that condition that with my ex? Can I actually forgive? Could I actually open my heart? Can I actually... The reason we do this is because the stronger the emotion we feel towards someone or something in our life, the more we pay attention to them. Yeah. And where we place our attention is where we place our energy. And so then we're giving our power away to that person or circumstance. That's vital life force you could use to change. The person who's sitting in the meditation and they want to quit, they're thinking they're doing their meditation wrong. I want to tell you, you're doing it right. That's the defining moment, right? And you lower the volume to that emotion, I guarantee you'll take your attention off that person. And sooner or later, when the body finally settles down and you get beyond it, you're going to take your power back. And that's building your own electromagnetic field. Now you have energy to heal. Now you have energy to create. We measured this. Now you have energy for creation.
Rule number 3, practice mental rehearsal.
We don't see things how they are, we see things how we are. And so I don't like to use the word visualization because I think it's been overused. I like to use the word mental rehearsal. I don't care if you're a virtuoso musician. I don't care if you are a performer or an actor. I don't care if you're a dancer or an athlete. Everybody does this who's engaged in getting better at whatever they do. They will rehearse the course rehearse the act enough times that once they can concept the whole thing to its completion, and they get out of that think box, then the think box is so important because we have to review our act. We have to repeat it enough times. And the act of mental rehearsal really installs the neurological hardware in your brain. It primes the brain so you have circuits to use. Now, mental rehearsal also changes the body. You can take a group of men and have them imagine or rehearse doing bicep curls for an hour a day for 2 weeks, and add an emotional component called stronger, harder, more intense. And for 1 hour, they practice in their mind doing those curls. At the end of 2 weeks, there's a 13.5 increase in muscle strength. They never lifted a weight. Their body's changing by thought alone. So the person who's priming their brain and body through rehearsal, when they get in their play box, there's no thinking. They're just doing. There's just the act. In fact, the thought of what they're doing becomes the experience. They get lost in the act, and their analytical facilities, their analytical mind is out of the way, and they can sustain a state where nothing in their environment is going to move them from this state. They're in the feeling of what it would feel like to play well, and they hold on to that feeling. And when the conditions get tense, they actually do something different. They self-regulate, and they actually crave this moment of performance to be able to produce an outcome. And so there's no mysticism to this. It's just what people do when they get really into something, is that we rehearse all the time. So people understand, if you take a group of people that have never played the piano before, and you teach them one-handed scales and chords, and they come and practice for 2 hours a day for 5 days. At the end of 5 days, if you do a brain scan before and after, they'll grow circuits on the opposite side of the brain. No magic there. You learn something new. Learning's making new connections. You get your body involved. You get some instruction. You have an experience. Experience enriches the circuits. Repeat it over and over again. Fire and wire, and pay attention and stay present. You'll assemble new neurological circuitry. Take another group of people, have them close their eyes, and actually have them mentally rehearse playing the scales and chords for 2 hours a day for 5 days. Scan their brain before and after, and at the end of 5 days, their brain will look like they've been playing the piano for 5 days, but they never lifted a finger. The brain literally changed through the rehearsal. Okay, so now take the person and put them in front of a piano. They never played the piano before. And they could actually play those scales and chords like the people who are actually physically demonstrating it. So what does that have to do for the single mother of 3 children? What does that have to do with the person who's trying to heal a health condition? It's not enough to just have a good meditation and get up and spend the rest of your day reacting and responding to the conditions in your life. That's 1 hour of living or conditioning your body and brain into the future against 15 hours of you responding emotionally from your past. So we got to rehearse, okay, how am I going to be in this situation? How am I going to change? What would love do today? What would greatness look like? It's those frontal lobe questions that actually begins to install the circuitry, and we all do it naturally. The only time we don't do it is when we're living in stress and we're living in survival. Why? Because it's not a time to create. It's not a time to learn. It's not a time to go inward. It's not a time to dream. It's a time to run, fight, and hide. And if you're spending the majority of your time in the arousal of those stress hormones, then most people their senses become heightened, they narrow their focus, and now they're engaged in doing anything they can, relying on something outside of them to take away that feeling. So if people begin to understand that they actually can change, and they understand a formula to do it, and they practice that formula and they rehearse it, both by mentally rehearsing it and actually participating in it, the effects should be in the experiment that something should change either in your body or in your life. And that's why we do it. So when you see the changes or the synchronicities or the coincidences or the opportunities starting to show up in your life, you're going to pay attention to what you did and you're going to do it again. And many people who have chronic health conditions that just get beyond those thoughts and those habits and those emotions that keep them as that same personality, and begin to think, act, and feel differently, notice dramatic changes in their health and in their biology. And we have the data to suggest that people who do this for 7 days, their body looks like genetically And biologically, they're in a different life. Their body is no longer responding in the same way. And they're no longer victims to their environment because they can self-regulate. There tends to be a greater resistance to anything in their environment, even on a microscopic level.
Rule number 4, become truly conscious.
Everybody has done this at some point in their life, right? Where they have to catch the thought. They have to catch how they speak, the act. They have to notice, ooh, this is that weird feeling again. I'm not going to just stay in this feeling. Can I change it, right? So then, if you remind yourself every single day of who you no longer want to be before you start your day, become conscious of your unconscious self, so conscious that you don't go unconscious in your waking day. The next fundamental question is, if your personality creates your personal reality, what thoughts do I want to fire and wire in my brain? And with attention, with presence and intention, energy, begin to fire and wire that thought. If you can fire and wire that thought, you start installing the neurological hardware in your brain. Keep doing it, and it starts acting like a software program. It becomes more automatic. That's the new voice in your head that says you can, it's possible, or whatever. And then, how are you going to behave in the Zoom meeting? How are you going to behave with your children? How are you going to behave with your ex? How are you going to be today when you open your eyes? Now, here's the cool part, and you know this. The act of closing your eyes and mentally rehearsing who you're going to be, planning your actions in the day. Mental rehearsal shows that you could actually install the neurological hardware in your brain to look like you already did it or it already happened. Now the brain's no longer a record of the past. It now becomes a map to the future. Okay, we've all rehearsed something in our life and our minds over and over again. Keep doing it, keep rehearsing it, keep reviewing it, and it'll start to become more automatic. And you could actually program a person then to behave as a happy person. No magic there. You installed the circuits. Now here's the hardest part. Can you teach your body emotionally what that future would feel like before it happens? In other words, don't wait for your healing to feel gratitude. Don't wait for your new relationship to feel love. Don't wait for the mystical moment to feel awe. That's kind of the old model of reality of cause and effect. Let's wait for something out there to happen to take away this emptiness, this guilt, this lack, this suffering, whatever. What if I could condition my body emotionally into the future? So then we started studying not only brain coherence, but we started studying heart coherence. Could a person trade resentment and watch their heart beat in a really irregular fashion to a more coherent fashion where when they're feeling gratitude, when they're feeling inspiration, when they're feeling love, could they practice that enough times, so much so that they can condition their body into the emotion of the future? Now, here's the cool part about that. Our research shows you could absolutely do that and do it so well that you feel like the future that you're in wanting to experience has already happened. And when it feels like it's already happened, you feel less separate from it, which means you're no longer looking for it. Why would you look for it if you feel like it's already happened? Now, to become familiar with the old self and then fire and wire and condition the body emotionally and chemically and become familiar with the new self, if you're truly in the experiment of life and I truly change my personality, there should be some evidence in my world that there's been some change, either in my body and in my life and in some way. And literally, their biology changes. Their immune system changes. We've isolated thousands of metabolites that show that there's a flourishing going on in the body. The body's responding. It's believing emotionally that it's living in a different environment. That's the key.
Also, to make sure you're actually taking action after watching this video, I've designed a special free worksheet just for this video. The worksheet will highlight all of the lessons learned in this video, as well as pull out our 3 favorite learnings and quotes that will inspire you to actually do something. The worksheet will also give you space to write down what your key takeaways are and your specific plan of action to make sure you're getting results. If you want the worksheet designed specifically for this video, absolutely for free, there's a link in the description below. Go click on it and start building the momentum in your life and your business. I'll see you there. Rule number 5, create heart coherence.
Can I teach my body emotionally what my future will feel like before it happens. Now, this is really important because there's a pandemic going on in the world that has nothing to do with a virus. It has everything to do with people's attention span and learning. People need a rush of dopamine in order to catch their attention, or a rush of adrenaline to learn. And so that they're dependent on their outer environment to regulate their emotional state. Now, this is different now. Now, I'm going to say to you, get in that beautiful heart of yours, and I want you to feel gratitude for the event before it occurs. Well, I can't feel it because it hasn't happened yet. Yeah, that's the conditioning. That's the hypnosis. So then when you teach people how to create heart coherence and self-regulate, then it makes sense then with a coherent brain, they can hold the image of their future. They can actually then rehearse who they're going to be. They can bring up the emotions of their future. Now, here's the cool part.
Awesome.
If they can feel their gratitude before their healing begins. If they feel their abundance or their worthiness before they have their wealth, it will start generating abundance. If they start being in love with themselves and being in love with life, they'll create an equal. That's the law. If they're in awe of life or in awe of the moment, they're going to have a mystical experience. If they're empowered, they're going to start stepping towards their success. So then when we wait for the outer world to change our internal state, that's a conditioning process, because some people will live in lack and separation their entire life because they're not creating anything. When this happens, then I'll feel happy. That's the illusion of three-dimensional reality. That's cause and effect. But feeling the emotion ahead of the experience is causing an effect. So the heart, when it's coherent, tends to produce an external magnetic field that's up to 3 meters wide. Now you got a Wi-Fi signal. Now, when you have a coherent brain, the brain could actually lay the information on that signal. And the thought of your wealth or your health can be carried on the frequency of that heart emotion. Emotions are the end product of an experience, right? Epigenetics says that's the environment that signals the gene. If the environment signals the gene and the end product of an experience in the environment is an emotion, that person's signaling genes ahead of the environment. And now they're biologically believing, behaving, and actually becoming that person. So if the person sustains that state, and we look at novice meditators that come for a week, and 90% of them, and the metabolites, not just a few, the majority of the metabolites in novice meditators suggest that their body's in a different life.
Rule number 6, alter your lifestyle.
Chronic diseases require a lifestyle change. And change is an interesting concept. So the hardest part about change is not making the same choice as you did the day before. And the moment you decide to make a different choice, get ready, because you're going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel unfamiliar. There's going to be some uncertainty. You're not going to be in the known. You're stepping out into the unknown. You're doing something differently. And the body, which has been conditioned to be the mind, the servant is now the master. So the body loves the familiar known. It loves the same suffering. It loves the same pain. It loves the same unworthiness. It's been conditioned that way for years on end. It really is running the show. So the moment you step out into the unknown, the body goes, wait a second, I'd rather feel guilty than this feeling of the unknown because I can't predict my future. So the body starts influencing the mind, and we start to hear this chatter in our head that says, well, I can start tomorrow. Tomorrow's a better day. You really don't feel like it today. Why don't you just have one piece of cake? You're a loser. It's your parents' fault. It's your ex's fault. It's your culture's fault, whatever it is. And if we accept, believe, and surrender to that thought as if it's the truth, that's an old circuit in the brain. That thought will lead to the same choice, which will lead to the same behavior, which will create the same experience, which will produce the same feeling or emotion. The person says, well, this feels right to me. No, that feels familiar. Crossing the river of change, going from the old self to the new self, there is a neurological, a biological, a hormonal, a genetic death of the old self. There's pruning going on. There's inhibition going on. We're no longer releasing the same stress hormones that give us the arousal. And so if there's three types of stress: physical, chemical, and emotional. Physical stress being trauma, injuries, accidents, falls. Chemical stress, viruses, bacteria, pesticides, pollutants, toxins, hangovers, whatever. Emotional stress, that's the big one. That's family tragedies, second mortgages, single parenting, 401ks, whatever it is. It tends to be then that the difficult one to manage really is our emotional stress. So if you can help people to get more physically balanced, more chemically balanced, and to become more emotionally balanced, then the effects of their personal change will be expedited.
Yeah.
And there'll be a longer duration. So the person sees you for 6 months, they start a great program, they start making the right choices, and they start feeling better. And then once they make the wrong choice, then it's a downward spiral back to the old unconscious habits and emotional condition. They feel unworthy again. And they return back to your clinic, or they return back to your consultation, and they come back with the same exact conditions. And the simple solution is, because you return back to the same personality, and you're feeling the same emotions, and your body's back to believing it's in the same environmental condition. So if your personality creates your personal reality, and I believe that, and your personality is made up of how you think, how you act, and how you feel, then the present personality who's listening to this podcast has created the present personal reality called their life. Not your ex, not your parents, not your boss. You create your life. So it makes sense then, if you wanted to create a new personal reality, you'd have to change your personality. In other words, if you want to change your life, you have to change, and nothing changes in your life until you change. So then this first step in change then, 95% of who we are is a set of unconscious thoughts, behaviors, and emotions. Then the first step is to become conscious of your unconscious thoughts, to become so aware of how you behave. Do you complain? Do you blame? Do you make excuses? Do you judge? Are you aggressive? And then look at the emotions. What is this emotion I'm feeling? Wow, this is guilt. This is sadness. This is victimization. This is unhappiness. Name it. So now you're so conscious of it that you don't go unconscious and return back to the same self. And how many times do we have to forget until we stop forgetting and start remembering? That's the moment of change.
Rule number 7, find perfect moments.
Never try to reason with your children when they're emotional, because no new information can enter their nervous system that isn't equal to the emotion they're experiencing. Do you want to be reasoned with when you're emotional? Do you want to be left alone? You want a few minutes, yes? Now, if there's an injury, if there's danger, of course you have to step in. If there's chemical needs, of course you have to, take care of that. But for the most part, with my children, I allowed them to have their moment. But whenever they had their moment, I would stop whatever I was doing, and I would turn and look at them. And I would watch them. I wanted them to know that I was observing them. Never said anything to them unless they asked. And when the emotions wore off, I would say to them, at the end of the day, I'd get in bed with them and I'd say, it's a tough day for me today. And I would share with them what I was working on as if they were my best friend or an adult. I didn't hold back at all with them. And I would do that to create the space of safety where they could start expressing what they knew that I observed about them in the most objective way, self-reflective way. And then they would say, oh yeah, I lost my temper with Paris, her friend. And I said, I know, I saw you. This is right before they go to bed. What's their brain waves at this point? Very suggestible. They're already dipping into theta. They're in alpha. They're in the love stories because it helps them to imagine. And then I would say to them the same thing every time. I really don't care what happened. What I care about is if you had another opportunity in the same situation, how you would do it differently. I just want to know how we could evolve your experience. And then, of course, they would give me answers that were always limited, especially my boys, but. And I'd say, yeah, well, if you do that, more than likely this is going to happen. Did you think of that? No. And then we go back and forth until we had a very clear understanding of what would be the higher road to take the next time. And then I would say to them, no, just so I'm sure that I understand this, can you repeat it back to me? Like, if that happened again, what would you do? And then they would go and say it, and then it would fall off a little bit, and I'd bring them back, and I'd review it with them until the point where they could explain it exactly what they would do. Are you with me? What did they just do? They mentally rehearsed it. Yes or no? And they're installing the circuitry. They're priming their brain for the experience. I'm giving them tools neurologically. Are you with me still? And I say to them, then if you did that, then that more than likely would create this experience, and how would you feel? And I would let them just contact that feeling just for a minute. And all I wanted to do was combine an intention and an emotion, a new emotion. You with me? Then I'd get them in bed, tuck them in, and I would tell them a story of these kids that lived in a mystical land with castles and dragons and princesses. And then I would tell them the story of these kids, and then I would bring in their story into the allegory. Because there's a story, allegory is a great way to associate with characters. And then I would tell them the lessons that they learned while I repeated it back to them in a very creative story. And so many times they'd look at me just before they'd fall asleep and they'd say, "Was that me?" I'd say, "I don't know, was it?" The next day, I'd get them up. Of course, I'm up at, before the sun. Come on, get up. We got things to do. Come on. I connect with them. I'd always connect with them and let them know that they're important and that they matter and that I love them. And I would tell them how the day was going to go, the main things, and I'm going to remind you just so you have some structure. And then there's going to be time to play, but we have to get these things done. I just help them understand that there was some ritual involved in this, some boundaries, some intention. And then when we were at breakfast, I'd say, "What was it that you would do if you had that same situation with Paris again? Tell me." And then I would have them rehearse it again. And I would do it to the point that they would say, well, they wouldn't say that. They'd say, "God, I just want this thing to happen so you can just leave me alone. I just can't wait for it to happen so I can get on with my life."
Rule number 8, change your environment.
I believe that if you can get 2 out of those 3 in order, if there's physical stress, emotional stress, and chemical stress, then there's got to be physical balance, chemical balance, and emotional balance. So let's just say you take all your vitamins, you take your drugs, you do your Pilates, you do your core power, you get massage, acupuncture, chiropractic, you run, do all the things, but you're still in a toxic environment where you're responding and reacting to the same conditions emotionally. Well, your body is going to stay in the past because the emotion is keeping you connected to the past. So what happens then, this happens numerous times, and the people that do come to our work, the chemo didn't work. The surgery didn't work. The radiation didn't work. The vegan diet didn't work. The ketogenic diet didn't work. The yoga didn't work. Nothing was working. And so then this is a point where the person says, nothing outside of me is changing what's inside of me. And we just had a cancer researcher on the stage that had stage 4 sarcoma in her uterus that metastasized everywhere. There's no evidence of her disease in her body any longer. Now, do I appreciate medicine? Do I appreciate pharmacology? Yes, I do. And I think for acute health conditions, that medicine has a really great handle on acute and crisis situations. When it comes to chronic health conditions require a lifestyle change. Period. You got to make different choices if you truly want to do it. So 100 years ago, 75 years ago, you get diagnosed with a health condition. You went to the doctor and he said, you need this organ taken out. You need this type of treatment. And I'm the authority. You have no access to the information that I have. So just do what I tell you. Right. And everybody signed and informed consent. And if my gallbladder's not good, take that out. If my uterus isn't good, take that out. Take out whatever you want. So then fast forward to today, you get a diagnosis. What happens now? People go, oh goodness, thanks for the diagnosis. And they go home and they research everything about the health condition. Why? Because information is available now through technology. So they go back to their doctor and they say, gosh, I want to try this other treatment. I want to try this alternative thing. And the doctor either says, I don't know anything about that, or that's trash. And the person now looks squarely at the doctor in the eye and says, time to find a new doctor. In other words, people do the best when they feel good about the care, the health care that they're choosing, right? So they're taking their power back now to be able to say, maybe there is another way. So the pharmacology that we use when we're altered, either with anxiety or depression or cyclic mood patterns or whatever it is an attempt to create chemical balance in the body. However, if you're still reacting to your ex in the same exact way, or you're still always predicting the worst thing that could happen to you in your future and embracing the emotion of that event, you're conditioning your body into anxiety, and you'll have a panic attack. And yes, the pharmacology will help to create more balance, but your response and reaction to the environment somehow causes you to become dependent on that exogenous substance. Now, I don't have a problem with that because everybody's at their own point in evolution. My mother just listened to anything the doctor said. Even when I said to her, Mom, your blood pressure is up because of stock market crash. She didn't want to hear that. She didn't think that she had to go to the doctor through all these tests and all this stuff. And of course, that's what it turned out to be. So there's a greater listening that's happening in the world now because of information. That it's the 4-minute mile. That person that had the sarcoma that stood on the stage was a cancer researcher that told her story. That's the 4-minute mile. I'm watching 1,500 people in the audience leaning in. They're witnessing truth right in front of them. Now they're conscious that there's another possibility that they were unconscious of. And she doesn't look vegan, and she doesn't look slim, and she doesn't look young and buffed and like a movie star. She just looks like a person. A normal person. And invariably, somebody in the audience listening to truth, she's speaking truth right now, telling her story about how hard it was to overcome herself, how hard it was to overcome her body when she was in pain and she didn't feel like doing the work. She did it anyway, to overcome her doubt, to overcome her fear, to overcome all of those things and believe in a future that she can't see or experience with her senses yet, but truly understands the science of how that takes place. Once you understand the what and the why, the how becomes easier. So we use science as the contemporary language to demystify the process of personal change and transformation. It is the language that we use that doesn't exclude anybody. We don't talk tradition. We don't talk religion. We don't talk culture. We don't talk spirituality, because that's going to divide the audience. So we create the scientific model. That's the first point. Learn it, be present with it. But the next step is you got to be able to teach it back. So in our audiences, when we explain things and we're combining quantum physics with neuroscience and all neuroendocrinology and all that stuff, once I finish the concept, you're going to have to turn to Jonathan and say, okay, let me just explain this. Because if I got to fire and wire this in my brain, I got to understand what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And nothing left to conjecture, nothing left to superstition, nothing left to dogma. You understand exactly what you're doing and why. And when you understand the meaning behind it, your prefrontal cortex turns on. And when it does, the powerhouse turns on. And you can get in an ice bath and know nothing about it, the benefits of an ice bath, get in an ice bath, and you could really have a really bad response. You can get some knowledge about what to do when you're in the ice bath and the value of it. And once you understand that and you get in the ice bath, you will actually have positive effects on your immune system, where when you didn't know what you were doing and assign meaning to it, you had a negative effect. So the person then who has the intention and the understanding, and we set up the conditions and the environment, and we give them numerous opportunities to get beyond themselves, numerous opportunities to practice and evolve their experience. Our research shows that if you do that for 7 days, the number of metabolic changes, metabolites from the cell, thousands of metabolites that are being released in the brain and body, suggests that the person is literally, their body's believing they're living in a different environment. Now, here's the weird part. They're in a ballroom. There's nothing really amazing happening in a ballroom. I've been to thousands of ballrooms. They all look the same. And yet the body's looking like it's in a very enriched environment. It's looking like it's in a different place. So when you have evidence and testimony, and you have evidence in scientific measurements, I think evidence all of a sudden becomes the loudest voice. And it only takes one person or two people to break that 4-minute mile. And then all of a sudden, just like an infection spreads amongst the community and creates disease, all of a sudden you see health and wellness become as infectious as disease. There's a dramatic transformation in biology. So now that that's possible, now that people are aware of that possibility, now it's in their consciousness, and consciousness is awareness, and information allows us to become aware of what we were unaware of. And that's what life is about, to evolve our experiences. And some of those people are dependent on pharmaceuticals and dependent. And I never say stop taking anything. I always say, keep going to your doctor, keep getting the scans, keep getting the tests. You need feedback to let you know what you're doing is correct, and then make another choice if it isn't. But a lot of people actually cross that river and wind up on the other side. And those are the people that we're studying, because their blood is rich with a lot of information that suggests that there's a very different experience going on inwardly.
Rule number 9, learn stress management.
The one thing, if it took you 5 years of living in chronic stress and what are the emotions of stress and survival? Aggression, anger, hatred, competition, judgment, insecurity, envy, jealousy, pain, suffering, guilt, shame, fear, anxiety, depression, hopelessness, powerlessness. Those are all derived from the hormones of stress. And psychology calls the normal human states of consciousness. Those are altered states of consciousness. And so then if you're living in emergency and your response to your coworker, to your boss, to the traffic, to the news, to whatever it is, weakens the organism, and you're switching on that emergency system over time. No organism can live in emergency mode for an extended period of time. You're drawing from the body's vital resources, and you're converting all of its energy into chemistry for some threat, real or imagined. Okay, so then if you keep doing that in chronic conditions, there's no energy for growth and repair. There's no energy for long-term building projects. The immune system dials down. The digestive system becomes out of phase. Hormones change. Our cardiovascular system changes. Our respiratory system changes. This is because the body is believing it's living in a dangerous environment, okay? So the problem then becomes that the arousal of these stress hormones that create fear, that create anger, aggression, or create pain, give the body a rush of energy. Now, people become almost like an addict. They need the problems in their life to reaffirm their addiction to that arousal, to that emotion. Yeah. And now, if you can turn that response on by thought alone, number one, you become addicted to your own thoughts. And number two, you become addicted to the very life, the life that you don't even like. Yeah. So then you ask the person, why are you this way? And they'll say, I am this way because of this event that happened to me 5 years ago. Well, what that really means is they had some really profoundly emotional experience. And the stronger the emotion we feel, the more altered we feel inside of us, the more we pay attention to what causes it. And the brain freezes a frame and takes a snapshot, and that's called the long-term memory. And so then that person then is altered biologically from that trauma, from that event. And what they don't know is every time they remember the event, they're producing the same chemistry in their brain and body as if the event was occurring. Okay, well then you tell the person, why are you this way? Well, then they'll tell the story about how it happened, and the research on memory says that 50% of that story, the way you recount it, is actually not accurate. It's actually not the truth. That people don't have the same brain, so they embellish the story to excuse themselves from changing. And if they make it more difficult or they add more components to it, then now they'll reaffirm their identity in being a certain way. That story becomes very important to them. And they believe it, they behave it as it, and they ultimately become it. And so then can you use those same principles and begin to start to manage your inner world? And by regulating, taking time before you start your day and say, okay, before I grab my cell phone, before I get up and run through my routine, my automatic routine where people are on automatic pilot and a habituation of what they did yesterday, and their body's dragging them into the same predictable future based on what they did in the past, and they've lost their free will to choose, to become conscious to a set of automatic programs. Well, if the familiar past is the known and the predictable future is the known, there's only one place where the unknown exists, and that's the sweet spot of the present moment. So if you said, okay, let me get present here. Let me remind myself of those thoughts I don't want to think. Let me remind myself of the behaviors I want to change. Let me review in my mind the emotions that caused me to move to a lower denominator. Let me become so conscious of that I won't go unconscious again. Let me remind myself who I do want to be, how I do want to think, how I do want to act, how I do want to feel. And let me see if I can get so good at doing this with my eyes closed when I start my day that I can do it with my eyes open. Now, this river of change, people say, I can't predict my future. Well, the best way to predict it is to create it, not in the known, but in the unknown. So our research shows that if you teach a person to go a little further than where they normally stop, when they get uncomfortable, they quit and reach for their cell phone, or they say, I'm busy, got too much to do. If you get people present, really, and you teach them how to stretch a little further, and they get beyond that known, and there's no danger, there's no threat, there's no survival, the body actually begins to relax into the present moment. And when that happens, we see this over and over again. Energy moves right into the heart. And now the heart, all of a sudden, starts to beat with more order, more coherence. The autonomic nervous system is no longer dysregulated from stress. It's starting to organize, and this feeling feels right? So then if you can sustain that state, independent of the conditions in your environment, then you're mastering your environment. You're mastering your life.
And rule number 10, the last one before some very special bonus clips, is retire your old personality.
If you keep firing and wiring the same thoughts in your mind that are related to complaining and blaming and making excuses and feeling sorry for yourself and judging other people, nerve cells that fire together, wire together, you'll develop a very, very complex neurological network that you installed, and keep doing it. It becomes so automatic, it becomes unconscious. Those thoughts, for the most part, are slipping by people's awareness unnoticed, unchecked. And every thought has a chemical associated with it. So the moment the person begins to review the problems in their life, and those problems are connected to certain people and certain objects and certain conditions at certain times and places, the moment they start thinking of their problems, they're thinking in the past, because the brain literally is a record of the past. And every one of those problems has an emotion associated with it. So the moment they recall the problem, they feel the emotion of sadness or guilt or shame or unworthiness. Now the body's in the past. So then if you begin to weigh the number of times people unconsciously do that in their waking day, they may have the best visualization, meditation, rehearsal in the morning and start out with really good intentions. But that's 45 minutes or a half an hour weighed against the other 16 or 15 hours of their day where they're back to their old self. And so the thinking positively have no effect on the body, because it's a small portion of what the person is doing on a regular basis. So the process of change, there's an equal component of unlearning. There's an equal component of becoming conscious of your unconscious thoughts, becoming aware of your automatic habits and behaviors, even how you speak. and sensing and noticing the emotions that you feel that have become so familiar to you on a regular basis that it feels like you. And the moment you stop doing that, you got to get ready, because it's going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel unfamiliar. It's not going to feel like you anymore. And many people will go back to suffering and complaining because at least they know how they feel. They were back in the known. So this is such an important concept, because this explains why people, when they do the work and they don't notice the results, they get up from their meditations believing in their future less, instead of doing their meditations and getting up and believing in their future more, right? And so the reality is, yes, it takes equal amount of firing and wiring and equal amount of emotional conditioning to condition the body to the future. But you have to retire the personality of the past, and you got to stay so conscious of your unconscious self that you don't go unconscious in your waking day. And that's being in that river of change. And it takes a lot of energy, a lot of awareness to do it. I travel around the world and I have the opportunity to talk to all kinds of people. And one of the things that, independent of people's beliefs, political beliefs, religious beliefs, whatever, there seems to be a common thread that people feel like something's not right. And I think when you get to a point where you realize that no healthcare plan, no government, no religion is going to take care of you, then who is going to take care of you? And the answer is you, right? So my interest is to give people the tools and the understanding that they could heal their body, that they could create a better life for themselves, that they could overcome past traumas and scars that were created even as early as childhood, that tend to be unconscious programs that keep them repeating the same, scenarios in their life, to teach people how to induce mystical experiences so that it changes the frame of the way they look at reality. And so what an amazing time in history to be alive, because consciousness is awareness, and awareness is paying attention, and paying attention is noticing. So if a person lives a life, as an example, and is diagnosed with a health condition, what they're conscious of is just a certain number of choices that they could make based on the past, based on tradition, based on what's worked for normal or natural. But what happens when that person has done the chemotherapy, has done the surgery, has done the radiation, has done the vegan diet, has done the gluten-free diet, has done the ketogenic diet, has done all the things, all the exercise, and they still have the same health condition? It begs the question, if our personality creates our personal reality, and our personality is made up of how we think, how we act, and how we feel, then the present personality who's listening to this podcast has created the present personal reality called their life. Not their ex, not their parents, not their culture. They create their life. So the fundamental question is, if I want to change my life, then that means that I have to change, or nothing changes in my life until I change, right? So the person who's done all these treatments and still faced with a health condition, this is just an example, all of a sudden says, there's got to be another way. There's got to be something else. And so knowledge, information, when we learn knowledge, when we learn information, we make new connections in our brain. That's what learning is. We're forging synaptic connections. But that philosophical, theoretical, intellectual information is void of experience. Someone who takes that knowledge and applies it and personalizes, demonstrates it, initiates that knowledge, is now interested in the truth of the experience of that information. So the person then who becomes conscious that they could actually heal themselves by changing the way they think, the way they act, the way they feel, If I truly go into the experiment of no longer thinking the same way, no longer acting the same way, no longer feeling the same way, and I start thinking about what thoughts I do want to fire and wire in my brain, and if I do it with intention and attention, I'll begin to install neurological hardware. Keep doing it, and it becomes like a software program. It becomes a new voice in your head that goes from I can't to I can. No magic there. If you said, how would greatness live today? What would love look like today? What would be a greater expression of myself in the things that I do? Turns out if you close your eyes and you rehearse in your mind how you're going to be in any aspect of your day, if you're truly present, the brain doesn't know the difference between the inward experience of what you're imagining and the outer real experience. The brain looks like you've already done it. The brain looks like it's already experienced it. Now, do that enough times, the hardware becomes a software program, and you start behaving like a different person.
Super athletes do this all the time.
This is musicians, athletes, dancers, everybody who's good at something is always rehearsing in their mind. That rehearsal is just as important as the physical demonstration. It's priming the brain because the brain is a record of the past. Now you're actually making it a map to the future. You're installing circuits to use. If you said, God, I lived my whole life in guilt. I didn't know it was guilt, in shame or unworthiness, and self-doubt, insecurity, fear. And all of a sudden, you're looking at that emotion. You understand that emotion is actually downregulating genes and creating disease. You figured that out. You read about it. It makes sense. Then all of the hatred, all the anger, all the bitterness you have to someone or something in your past is keeping you connected to the past. So you'd say, can I teach my body emotionally what a new future could feel like before it happens? Not waiting for your wealth to feel abundance, or waiting for your relationship to feel love, or waiting for your healing to feel gratitude. That's the old model of reality of cause and effect. This is about causing an effect. Turns out if you can elevate your emotional state and you can sustain that emotional state, your body's so objective that it doesn't know the difference between the real life experience that's creating that emotion and that emotion that you're creating by thought alone. Your body's actually believing it's living in a new reality, a new environment. Now, the environment signals the gene. The end product of an experience in the environment is an emotion. That person is actually signaling genes ahead of the environment. Genes make proteins, and proteins are responsible for the structure and function of the body. The expression of proteins is the expression of life. Okay. Every day the person practices going from the old self to the new self. This is what's happening in the world right now. As they start to change and they start unfiring and unwiring and they stop conditioning the body emotionally to the past and practice this, they emerge as a new personality. They become somebody else. And like magic, the disease exists in the old person and there's somebody else. Now here's where consciousness comes in. That person comes to a workshop and they stand on the stage in front of 1,500 people and they tell their story. And everybody in that audience is leaning in. Why? Because they're looking at truth. They're looking at the example.
Someone who just got healed from a chronic...
I'm talking about stage 4 cancers. I'm talking about Parkinson's disease. I'm talking about rare genetic disorders. And now the person in the audience is becoming conscious of a possibility that they were once unconscious to. And when they see that's possible, it's a 4-minute mile. I mean, 4-minute mile, nobody thought anybody could break a mile in under 4 minutes. They said it was biologically and physiologically impossible. 1,400 people have done it already. So this is the 4-minute mile. Someone's piercing through a limitation, a level of unconsciousness. And now that's a footprint in the quantum field. But in 3-dimensional reality, you're looking at that person, they look no different than anybody else. And the person says, if that person can do it, I can do it as well.
If you give people sound information, and then they can repeat that information, they're wiring it in their brain. They're creating a new model of understanding. If you show them how to apply that information, if they do it properly, they will have some type of transformation. That transformation
isn't something that causes people to feel bad or unworthy. It causes them to open their hearts. It causes them to feel joy, to feel gratitude. They feel differently. And if you're able to then create that elevated emotion and you teach people more information, they will continue to transform themselves, and that's called evolution. If you think the same thoughts always lead to the same choices. The same choices lead to the same behaviors. The same behaviors create the same experiences, and the same experiences produce the same feelings, and you're now caught in your old self. But new thoughts should lead to new choices, and new choices should lead to new behaviors. New behaviors should create new experiences, and new experiences should create new emotions, and that should inspire evolution. We say that your personality creates your personal reality. And your personality is made up of how you think, how you act, and how you feel. We could say that your personality is your state of being. So now, geniuses, if you keep thinking the same thoughts, keep demonstrating the same behaviors, keep living by the same feelings and emotions, your personal reality is going to stay exactly the same. But if you have new thoughts that lead to new choices, that demonstrate new actions, that create new experiences, that cause you to feel differently, you will begin to walk into a new future. How many people understand this? So most people try to create a new personal reality as the same personality, and it doesn't work. You literally have to become someone else. So, crossing the river of change, going from the old self to the new self, requires you stepping into the unknown. And if you are now in the unknown and you feel uncomfortable because you're leaving guilt behind, you leave unworthiness behind, you see, the biggest problem with most people is they want to create wealth, but they feel lack. They want a new life, but they feel unworthy. That's mind and body in opposition. And our research shows that you can teach people how to recondition their body to a new mind. And when that occurs, they begin to create very powerful things in their life.
Would you say it's smart to focus on one goal? I mean, if you're sick, obviously it's smart to focus on getting healthy. But if you have a regular life and you say, I would like to have the classical stuff, more money, more wealth, more love, more joy. Would you say in those meditations it's smart to focus on different goals, or should it rather be the big goal, like a big vision I have for my life, that all the steps on the way are just marks I will pass at one point?
Well, let's answer that on two levels too, because people come to our workshops for all different reasons. Some people come because they're sick. Some people come because they want more money. Some people want a new job, a new opportunity, a new career, a new relationship. Some people want the mystical. The people come for all kinds of reasons. To me, I don't care. What I care about is that they latch on to a vision and they learn how to create. Whatever drives them to that elegant moment where they're so present and so passionate about what they want, and they have a clear intention, a clear vision, a coherent brain, and they have an elevated emotion combined with it, that they create heart coherence. And now they're broadcasting a whole new energy into the field. And whatever we broadcast into the field is our experiment with destiny. So I want people to know the how. Because we have plenty of people that have made millions and millions of dollars that were living in the backseat of their car or filed bankruptcy. We have plenty of people that were stage 4 cancer, serious health conditions that are healed. But really, people think they come for those reasons, but we come for wholeness. That's why we come. That when we feel so whole and so happy with ourselves, so connected to something greater, if you feel wholeness, it's impossible for you to want. How can you want when you're whole? When you're whole, you feel like you have everything. So I want people to reach that point where they feel so whole that they no longer want, and that's when the magic happens. Teaching them that allows them to understand that when they come back to their senses, they open their eyes. They're not looking for the experience. They feel like it's already happened. And if you feel like it's already happened, why would you be looking for it? Then, if your body is conditioned emotionally into that future, you're not separate from the energy of your future. You're connected to it. But the moment you get in traffic and you start getting angry, you get on the line at the bank and you start getting impatient, or you're sitting in a staff meeting and you start judging a coworker, you just disconnected from the energy of the future, and now you're back to the energy of your past, and you've done nothing wrong. You just lost your connection to the future. Now, the importance of that is to notice that you're disconnected. And if you say to me, well, that person made me feel this way and think this way, I'd say, oh my gosh, you're back to the unconscious program of being a victim in your life. The victim is saying that someone or something is controlling how I think and feel. But a person who's producing outcomes in their life, all of a sudden they say, wow, the way I'm thinking and feeling is creating outcomes in my life. Now I'm a creator in my life, and now I believe less and I'm a victim of my life.
Our immune system is kind of like our rudimentary nervous system. It has cells that are mobile, and they're called plasma cells or white blood cells. And their job is an internal defense. And many of our body's plasma cells line the mucous membranes, gut, the digestive tract, all the orifices of the body, the nose, the mouth, ears. And it's a line of defense against foreign invaders and toxins. And when the immune system is facing some foreign invader, whether it be a virus, a bacteria, a mold, a fungus, some foreign agent, it is the army of plasma cells that move towards the danger and begin to attack these foreign agents. And there are cells in your immune system called T cells. And T cells are like the ninjas of the immune system. They release very powerful chemicals that can denature and break down any foreign invader. And T cells have these little trumpets that stick out on their receptor site. So picture this big circular spherical glob, and you have all these different receptors. And these T cell receptors are these long trumpet appendages. And when they come up to a virus, or they come up to a bacteria, when they come up to even a cancer cell, they notice that it's a foreign agent, and immediately this T cell receptor attaches to that foreign agent and begins to release a lot of unhealthy chemicals that begin to cause that foreign agent to die, and then memorizes that foreign agent and passes the information on to the army of the rest of the white blood cells in the body. And this is a strong immune system. And when plasma cells and white blood cells begin to function well, they release chemicals called immunoglobulins. And immunoglobulins are proteins that are in the shape of a Y. And those Y-shaped proteins are antibodies. And what they do is, when the white blood cell releases an antibody, it begins to block the receptors of the foreign agent that's trying to attack the white blood cells. So when a healthy immunoglobulin is released, it suppresses the warfare, the cell receptors that are trying to attack the white blood cell. And now you have a strong defense, you have a strong immune system, and your body right now is doing that. In fact, your body is always evaluating all those foreign agents, whether it's a virus, a bacteria, or even a cancer cell. And it's working to keep the body in balance. And the immune system, a strong, healthy immune system, does that constantly, always behind the scenes of your awareness.
We have such compelling evidence in science with brain scans. You can make your brain work better. You can make your heart work better. You can make your immune system work better. You can make your cells go from really sick to really healthy. We've got great evidence. You can become immune to serious viruses. You can be immune to bacteria. We've got the measurements. You can lengthen your life. We have great evidence, and the people aren't monks. They're not nuns. They're not religious scholars. They're just common people. And then we have testimony of people who are the example of truth. They are the example of truth. I would rather have dinner with those people than anybody else. They know something, right? So evidence then becomes the loudest voice, right? And that's what I think what people are looking for right now. The truth is so lost in sensationalism, and the truth is so lost in emotional agreement. And so people who want to feel fear, they program themselves and accept, believe, and surrender that. People who want to be hateful, it's all there. It's all there, and it's a matrix to find the way out, right? And I think there's a door. I just think that we have to trust the innate information that comes from within us. In order to create a new future, to change something in your life, nothing changes in your life until you change. That's the story, right? So then the question is, okay, in order for me to create something new, I'm going to have to combine a clear intention. That's a function of the brain and the mind. That's a process that you can get better at. And you got to combine that with an elevated emotion. And that means then you can't wait for your healing to feel grateful. You can't wait for your new relationship to feel love. You can't wait for your wealth to feel abundance. That's the old model of reality of cause and effect. In fact, we're going to teach people actually how to feel the emotion before it happens. And when you combine that clear intention with an elevated emotion, that's going to require your heart to move into balance and move into order. And it turns out that's a skill too that you can practice. So then when you combine those two elements, so that clear intention with the elevated emotion, and you can sustain that for a period of time, the coherence in the brain, the coherence in the heart actually act like a Wi-Fi signal. You're starting to put out a broadband spectrum of frequency and energy that causes you to feel connected to something. And now you're no longer trying to get something done or waiting for something in your outer world to change to take away the emptiness or lack you're feeling because you don't have the experience yet. If people can actually feel the feelings of the emotions before the experience happens, they wouldn't be looking for it because they would feel like it already happened, right? So we teach people how to sustain these states. And if they can, the side effect of that is that you start seeing synchronicities in your life, those serendipities, those coincidences, those opportunities that you're no longer going anywhere to get them. And you're not trying to control the outcome or force the outcome or fight for the outcome or predict the outcome or compete for it. That's when we're matter trying to change matter. When you synchronize your energy to a possibility in your life and you start seeing those synchronicities in your life, now when you start seeing those opportunities occurring, you're just going to start paying attention to what you've been doing and do more of it. And you go then from being the victim of your life to being the creator of your life. And the cool part about it is you don't have to go anywhere to get it. Somehow, out of nowhere, it seems to come to you. And those moments are moments of awakening. So the formula really is about combining quantum physics with neuroscience, with neuroendocrinology, with psychoneuroimmunology, with electromagnetism, epigenetics, all of these different branches of science to build a model to show people that you actually can be the creator of your life. People that were traumatized from childhood, that were abused sexually, physically, emotionally, that were suicidal, that had all kinds of health conditions, they came to the edge of that emotion that kept them connected to the past. And they were ready to give up in one meditation because they never had felt an emotion like this that they could remember, that it was so intense. And they thought about all the times for the last year that they never missed a day of doing a meditation, even when they didn't feel like it, or when they wanted to quit halfway through and they didn't, they went all the way. They thought about all those times that they went to that point and they went one more time.
Really?
And their words are always the same. And my heart blew wide open. And I look back at my entire past, and I don't want to change one thing in my past because it brought me to this present moment. And I can see my betrayers. I could see the people in my life that had a hand in this. And I have nothing but compassion for them, because now the person is no longer viewing that past from the same level of consciousness. They're viewing it from a place of love, of wholeness, and they see the greater good of all of it. And now their conditions, their health conditions, their endometriosis, their uterine tumors, whatever it is, literally disappears, and
they have an incredible change in their brain chemistry. They're in love with life. They're off their meds. They're not suicidal. Why would they be? They're free. So it can happen in an instant when the heart is healed. And everybody gets the new signal. The body's out of the past. The body's no longer feeling the emotions of the past. And sometimes we got to come right up against that edge. That's the great moment.
If you have a very brain-driven person like myself, and in some parts I disconnected from my emotions just to protect me in regular life, and it's a challenge for me to reconnect to my old emotions that I already had in circumstances that would help. Do you have any advice?
Yeah, well, God, I have a lot of advice around that because 70% of the time, people in their waking lives, they live in a very protective state. They live in a state of stress or in a state of survival. In fact, it's such a program that we don't know that we're doing this. We're always spanning the environment to determine if it's safe or not. And if something appears out of the predictable or unknown, it alerts us. And we move into a state of arousal and we begin to turn on the very systems that begin to say danger, threat, possible scenario that's not safe. And when that happens, we literally begin to anticipate an outcome. And when we do that, we're always preparing for what could go wrong. And we begin to create the emotions ahead of the experience of what happens if it goes wrong, whether it's fear, anxiety, worry, sadness, pain. We do that unconsciously. That's what a program is. And that becomes the habit. So if you're living in a world where men have to provide and show a certain amount of success and be competitive, then you're not going to open your heart. It's not a time to do that. It's a time to survive and thrive in an environment. And yet, in our work, I see men that if they practice opening their hearts, and it's just being a child again, being a boy again, being curious, being wondering, being free, allowing yourself to let go.
I think the ego is something that is healthy when it's in balance. Like if I have a bonfire in my backyard and the flames are getting a little bit too big and there's ashes and sparks flying off the bonfire, your ego says, David, step back. You know, it's preservational, wants to take care of the body. If we're hiking on a cliff and we come to a very narrow path and it's a 1,000-foot drop, your ego's going to say, stay close to the wall. Don't go out to the edge. You could be injured and be hurt. So the ego has a function to really, in a sense, be analytical and weigh what we know against what we don't know. And it's healthy. The problem is when it's driven by the hormones of stress, and stress is when your body is knocked out of balance. It's knocked out of order. That state actually causes you to be altered, and there'll always be a gap between the way things appear or the way you appear and the way things really are. You're in an altered state. Now, for the short term, that's great. All organisms can tolerate that. But if you keep doing that for an extended period of time, the arousal that's created from the stress hormones actually causes the analytical mind all of a sudden to go into overdrive. So now the endorsement of the ego becomes enhanced and we become selfish. That's what it does. It causes us to be self-indulgent, to be self-centered, to be self-important, to be self-aggrandizing, to be full of self-pity, because in stress, there's only one thing that's important when you're in survival. And that's you. And so all of our attention goes on our body. All of our attention goes on all the elements in our environment. And we become very preoccupied with time. Now, when we're in balance and there's order in the autonomic nervous system, there's health. And if stress is when you move out of balance, autonomic dysregulation, then you are altered from wholeness. You are separate from everyone and everything in your life, and you tend to trust less. It's not a time to open your heart in the jungle. The survival gene is switched on. You don't communicate very well. You're looking at how you can get to where you need to be or accomplish what you need to do first. And you got to be there first and compete, because this is all driven by those stress hormones. So the ego becomes out of balance. Now, here's the cool part about all of this. When people are driven by those stress hormones and they don't know how to change it,
They don't know how to self-regulate. Again, it's not that you react. The question is, how long are you going to react? If they don't know how to do that, the problem with most people is they start analyzing their life within the emotion that's disturbing them. Now, emotions are a record of the past. So what we see on brain scans over and over again, when you start overanalyzing and overthinking in a selfish way, 100% of the time, you'll make your brain worse. And that will have dramatic effects on your body. So when the heart is racing because it's pumping blood, but you're sitting in a Zoom call and you're smiling and you're looking at that person in a Zoom call and you're thinking about ways to murder them, you're producing those chemicals, but you're not running and you're not fighting and you're not hiding. So what happens is the heart is pumping against a very closed system and it moves out of order, it moves out of balance. And now the autonomic nervous system, which controls and coordinates all other systems in your body, is out of balance, and that dysregulation causes disease. So then the fundamental question is, okay, can I trade fear? Can I trade anger? Can I trade competition? Can I trade frustration, resentment, impatience, hostility, hopelessness, powerlessness, whatever, anxiety for an elevated emotion? Can I learn how to dial down those stress hormones and practice feeling elevated emotions? Turns out you can do that. Now, the real question is, when you're in your heart, you're not so selfish. In fact, when there's a change in blood flow to the heart and oxytocin and nitric oxide is released, you tend to want to give. You tend to want to consider the whole. And you lead with your heart. You're not separate from anybody. You're functioning as a community. So I think then that our future as human beings is that we have to be able to live in an elevated state in our hearts. And if we fall from grace back into those survival emotions, the key is to be able to self-regulate and get so good at it in your meditation with your eyes closed, so good at it that you can do it with your eyes open. Now that's when the game becomes really, really important. So when people do the work and they do their meditations and they come up against themselves, gosh, I want them to. I want them to come up against their fear in the week-long workshops. I want them to come up against their impatience. I want all those thoughts that come up that say, I can't, it's too hard, I'll never change, it's my ex's fault, it's my boss's fault. I want those thoughts to be right in their face. And I want to give them tools to let them know that right on the other side of that thought, right on the other side of that propensity to want to get up and quit, right on the other side of that emotion that's keeping them connected to the past, if they're willing to sit in the fire, to sit with themselves, and instead of getting up and quitting on themselves, learn how to self-regulate and create brain and heart coherence, I guarantee you, every time they go a little further and they produce those victories add up. So what's the side effect of that? You return back to your life and you don't need jerk as much. Why? Because you just overcame some part of your aggression and anger by sitting with your body and like training an animal. Training a dog, I don't know, training the servant to be present, to be greater than the body as the mind, to execute a will that's greater than those unconscious programs. And what we found out is when people actually apply some type of formula to be able to do this, every time they bring the body back into the present moment, it starts liberating energy. So there goes the frustration. There goes the impatience. And all of a sudden, the unknown, which tends to be such a scary place for most people, is the present moment. You see the side effect of that is the person's more present. They're less preoccupied with all the things that people spend most of their attention on. Now, so you overcome the ego, you overcome the personality. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just you got to be able to lay it down. And as you temper your body and your mind, the ego tends to be less selfish and more selfless. And then the side effect of that is that then if I say, hey, look at David, he's actually doing it, I'm going to try it too because he's doing it. And the research in neuroscience says you hang out with people that do things, your brain synchronizes and you start doing those same things. It's called an emergence. Emergence. That's the birds all moving in the same direction. It's a school of fish moving as one mind and one heart. If you study that, you think there's one leader, like that everybody's following a leader, like a top-down phenomenon. It's actually wrong. It's a bottom-up phenomenon. Everybody's leading. So the way we change the world then is that you work on yourself, I'll work on myself. We get to show up and bring our best. And when we're not at our best, we excuse ourselves, get back to that state, and we present ourselves back to the world. And I think this is such a great time in history where people really need some tools to be able to cope with all the challenges in the world.
We may not be able to control everything in our outer world,
Right.
but we certainly can control our inner world. And so it's not so important to not react. I mean, everybody reacts, I react. The question is, how long are you going to react? So if you keep an emotional reaction going on for an extended period of time, you're memorizing that emotion, and your body, as the unconscious mind, is believing it's living in the same past experience 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. The body doesn't know the difference between the real experience that produces the emotion and the emotion that we create by thought alone. So then the emotion then reaffirms the state, and then people start to use the problems and the conditions in their life to keep that emotion going, and I would call that an addiction. So we become addicted to the very life we don't even like. So it's important then for people to realize then when you have that moment where you have crisis or something breaks down, that you do have control over it, and it's a formula. And it's a skill, and our research shows that you can teach people how to do that. And so then when you're living by some emotion, there'll always be a gap between the way things appear and the way things really are. Emotions alter our perception. And if you act during that time, you'll always say the same thing. I should have never said that. I should have never done that. I should have never thought that. I should have never sent that email. So then shortening your emotional reactions is a level of intelligence then that causes you then to recalibrate. Because most people don't think they have control over that. They'll say, that person did it to me. That circumstance is the reason I am this way. Then I would say, if something in your outer environment is controlling your thoughts and feelings, then you're a victim to your environment.
Yeah.
And yet, how you think and feel creates your outer world. So if you're thinking and feeling equal to everything that's known in your present personal reality, you keep creating more of the same. So to change then is to think and feel greater than the conditions in your environment. And to be able to do that to such a degree then, you're no longer reacting to the same people in the same way. And that takes an effort. It's not easy in the beginning. But once you start practicing, you get better at it. And just like anything else, you start to move through your life with more coherence, and you're less likely to knee-jerk. And if you're less likely to knee-jerk, then you're not in an unconscious program. I think one of the most important things when we lose sight of our vision is to make time for ourselves. And I think that when you invest in yourself, you invest in your future. Disconnecting from people in your life and places that you have to go and things that you do or things that you own long enough to begin to reignite a vision of how you see yourself or how you see your future, and begin to emotionally embrace that future and change your state of being allows us to see a whole new landscape. If you've lost sight of your vision, take a moment and remember that vision and begin to emotionally embrace it. And from that state of being, start to think about the things you want to do, the choices you want to make. Write them down. Review the behaviors that you have to demonstrate, your goals and experiences and how it's going to feel. When you do that enough times, you're changing your brain neurologically and you're changing your body genetically. Write down the unconscious thoughts that you have to stay conscious of. Become aware of the choices that you no longer need to make. Review the behaviors and habits you have to change about yourself and become so conscious of them that you won't go unconscious at all during your day. Remember the experiences in your environment that you need to stay away from, whether it's a person or a thing, just for a period of time so that you can keep that vision alive. And most importantly, review those emotions that keep you connected to the past and become so conscious of them and name them when you feel that feeling, that if it's guilt or sadness or pain, the moment you start feeling it and you become conscious of it, that's when you can begin to change. And if you keep doing this over and over again, the unlearning and the relearning, the breaking the habit of the old self and reinventing a new self is going to cause you to arrive at a whole new future. And when you do, this could become your new habit.
We're all faced with great challenges, brilliantly disguised as impossible situations. And there's always a door. there is always a door. And so your personality creates your personal reality. It's that simple. And your personality is made up of how you think, how you act, and how you feel. So the present personality who's listening to this show has created the present personal reality called their life, which means if you're going to change something in your personal reality in your life, you got to change your personality. You have to change. Nothing changes until you change. That's the bottom line.
You change, but the thought of changing my personality seems so like, but I like who I am, kind of, but I'm also cranky. I'm also annoyed. So like, who is that person underneath all of these ailments, I guess, all of these, but it's a weird thing to say, you change your personality.
Well, look, I mean, there's many things that I love about my personality, just like you do. I'm going to take that with me. But there are things, if I'm going to be defined by a vision of the future, there are things that can't come. Because the moment you say, I want to have a mystical experience where I transcend this three-dimensional world, and you want to have a really profound moment, a transcendental moment, you start showing up for that, and it doesn't happen right away, then what? You're going to start disbelieving. You stop believing in yourself. So the moment we're defined by a vision of the future that's bigger than us, that vision of the future is not the vision of the past. And when we do that, we take with us our discipline. We take with our concentration. We take our presence. We take our passion. We take our strengths with us. All those things you take. But the things that are standing in the way are those old beliefs. The things that stand in the way that stop you from connecting to it. Those are the things you come up against, and it's not the mystical experience or the transcendental experience. It's who you become. It's not your wealth. It's not your health. It's who you become. It's not your freedom. It's who you become in the process, and it's the overcoming process that we overcome till we finally become. And there's so many great people in history. You know, even wealthy people. People always want to be wealthy, but if you study wealthy people that really did it, they failed miserably thousands of times until they figured it out. And so you keep showing up for yourself enough times, you're going to change. You're going to change. You're going to be thinking differently. You're going to be acting differently. You're going to be feeling differently. And that's when the universe starts to conspire in ways that we just never even thought about. That's the beauty behind creation. When a person begins to slow their brainwaves down, they have to go, when you're in stress, when you're in survival, you narrow your focus on a cause. That's called what's called a convergent focus. So now you're blessing the energy centers of the body. They're under the control of the autonomic nervous system. And when the autonomic nervous system moves out of balance, the brain moves out of balance, right? We narrow our focus on the cause, and it causes each one of these different energy centers to move into incoherence as well. And those little individual brains start moving into incoherence and send an incoherent message to the cells and tissues and organs. Hormones then become downregulated and the body starts moving out of balance. So when we bless the energy centers or we reprogram these energy centers, two things has to happen. They have to be able to slow their brainwaves down. They have to get out of that high beta state. And the way we do it is to go from a narrow focus to a broad focus. When you open your focus, when you open your awareness, that's what creates coherence in the brain, because you're going against that habit of putting your attention on matter. So there's a convergent focus, which is focusing on matter, and then there's a divergent focus, which is focusing on energy. Well, reality is both particle and wave, matter and energy. So if a person can slow their brainwaves down from beta brainwaves to alpha brainwaves, now they're starting to fall out of their thinking brain right into the home of the autonomic nervous system.
Okay.
If the person can't change their brainwaves, it'll never work because they're in their neocortex in their thinking mind, right? So that's one thing that has to happen. The second thing that has to happen is that they have to practice both a convergent focus and a divergent focus.
So by the convergent, you're focusing on, let's say I'm going to focus on this energy center, right? And then you move your focus to another energy center.
Well, first you focus on that energy center, that's particle, and then you focus on the space around it, that's wave.
Okay.
And so when you open your awareness and you're able to do that, and you're in your autonomic nervous system, you can put an intention there, which will create more balance in estrogen, more balance in your sexual organs. You move to your second center, you put your attention there. That's where you place your attention is where you place your energy. So now you're beginning to direct energy into that center. But now you become aware of the space around it. Why? To create coherence in that little brain. Send the coherent message to the cells and tissues. Go to your third center, right in the pit of your gut. Well, there's a huge celiac plexus there, or solar plexus. A lot of connections in there. So now put your attention.
That's a big one.
That's a big one.
Always getting a lot of signs there.
Yeah.
Here and here.
Yeah.
Heart and solar plexus.
Yeah, those are big ones. And you tune into that energy. Then you put your attention in your heart. It has its own individual brain.
Yeah.
And when you make energy here, when energy finally arrives here, guess where it goes automatically? Straight up. We've measured it. So now once you start opening your heart, you get more energy in your heart, you get more energy in your brain.
Got it.
And
Short on time, just go straight to the heart.
That's why we do it. That's exactly that's why we open the heart. So it creates a field, and it begins to drive energy to the brain. So now that energy is going to cause the person to have a different consciousness, a different thought pattern, right? And now they're going to be thinking possibility, because in survival, the first three ones are all about survival. It's really not a creative process of creating from mind. It's more about a more primitive, humanistic part of us, animal part of us. So then there's the thyroid plexus, the pineal gland, the pituitary gland. So we've seen when people create coherence in each one of these energy centers, and they do it properly, they know how to change their brain waves. They get into the operating system. They can master convergent and divergent focus. They're no longer living just this way. They've practiced opening their awareness and focus on energy, becoming conscious of it. And as these brains become more coherent and they start producing different signals to hormones and chemicals and to different glands in the body, that's what's being upregulated to make different expressions.
I want to show you what it looks like when you learn something new. You have 100 billion neurons in your brain. 100 billion neurons. The number of connections you have in one neuron is between 10,000 and 40,000 connections. If you took 100 billion sheets of paper and you stacked them on top of each other, it would be 5,000 miles high. That's the distance from Los Angeles to London. If you took a scoop of gray matter, the size of a grain of sand, you would have 100,000 neurons in it with over 1 billion connections. Now, I'll stop right after this slide. Learning is making new synaptic connections. Every time you learn something new, this is what's happening in your brain, geniuses. If you learned one bit of information today, your brain did this. Boom. That's learning. Physical evidence as a result of your interaction in the environment. Every time you learn something in your brain, there's a physical change that takes place, and learning is making new connections. Are you with me? This is how fast it happens, too. That's learning. If you learn anything this week, you've made a footprint. If learning is making new synaptic connections, then if you keep firing the same thoughts over and over again, you're going to wire them in your brain. So then if learning is making new synaptic connections, then remembering is maintaining them. And all of a sudden, they develop a long-term relationship. And just like any relationship, the more you communicate, the more they connect. And neurons are exactly the same way. Now, as you begin to learn information, neurons tend to assemble themselves into networks, or what's called neural networks. And neural networks are just gangs of neurons that have fired and wired together to form a community of neurosynaptic connections that's related to a thought, a skill, a habit, a behavior, a concept. And neural networks are automatic programs. You have a neural network to brush your teeth, to put on makeup, to speak a language, to walk. All of a sudden, those neurons then form a hardware circuitry, but if you keep repeating it, the hardware becomes a software program and it becomes automatic.
Your personality creates your personal reality. And your personality is made up of how you think, how you act, and how you feel. So the present personality who's listening to this little video has created the present personal reality called your life. Which means then, if you wanted to create a new personal reality, a new life, you would have to change your personality. That means you'd have to start thinking about what you've been thinking about and change it. It means you'd have to become aware of your unconscious habits and behaviors and modify them. And you'd have to look at certain emotions that keep you connected to experiences in the past and decide, do these emotions belong in your future? The beauty behind this is that when you begin to change how you think, how you act, and how you feel, you should begin to see changes in your life. And I recommend that you try it out. You can't go to the future holding on to the biology of your past. Decide what thoughts you can bring to your future. Write them down. Thoughts like, I can't, it's too hard, I'll never change, I'll start tomorrow, what's wrong with me, it's someone else's fault. Decide on what behaviors or actions or unconscious habits you have to change. How do you talk? Do you complain? Do you blame? Do you make excuses? Do you feel sorry for yourself? Just become so conscious of those behaviors that you'll never go unconscious again. And lastly, you have to decide what emotions no longer belong in your future. That means if you want to be wealthy, you can't take lack. If you want to be healthy, you can't take insecurity or fear. You got to begin to condition your body to a new mind. If you do this every single day, your personality creates your personal reality. And your personality is made up of how you think, how you act, and how you feel. Change any one of those things and you change your life. And begin to measure the effects of you it cause. Give it a shot. If you think about gratitude, when you receive something favorable or you just receive something favorable, if something's happening to you or something just happened to you that you are excited about, you feel grateful. So the emotional signature of gratitude means that it's already happened or something wonderful is happening to you. Now, the body is so objective that it does not know the difference between a real life experience that's creating that emotion and that emotion that you're fabricating by thought alone. So the body's believing it's living in an environmental condition that's favorable to you. And we only accept, believe, and surrender to thoughts that are equal to our emotional state. So in the state of gratitude, your body is more prone to be programmed through its autonomic nervous system into a different destiny. And the research that we've done on our research team shows that just 4 days of feeling gratitude can strengthen your immune system by 50% by releasing an immunoglobulin called immunoglobulin A, which is the body's primary defense against bacteria and viruses. It's better than any flu shot, and it's the body's natural capacity. So when we trade anger and frustration and fear and anxiety and pain and suffering and guilt for an elevated emotion, the autonomic nervous system starts to regulate back into homeostasis and balance. And of course, stress is when the autonomic nervous system is knocked out of homeostasis and balance. It's dysregulation. So we teach people how to give thanks for the things that they create in their life actually before it happens. And when we do that properly, we start to see measurable changes in the person's body and measurable changes in their energy and ultimately measurable changes in their life. So the concept of presence is such an important concept because I think that paying attention is being present, and it's a skill just like anything else. The more you practice it, the better you get at it. And I think we know when people are present with us in our lives is because they're paying attention to us, and we know when they're not present with us because they're not paying attention. Well, where you place your attention is where you place your energy, bottom line. So if you're thinking about what's going to happen in the next moment or what's going to happen in a day, or you're reviewing what's something that happened 3 days ago, you're placing your attention in some future scenario or some past memory. And we siphon energy out of the present moment, and we don't have available energy then to really begin to create an outcome in our lives. But if we're truly present and we're relaxed and poised in the present moment, if where you place your attention is where you place your energy, then you have a lot of energy in the present moment to execute, a lot of energy in the present moment to make decisions. The more you do this, the more you experience those moments of flow, the synchronicities, the serendipities, the opportunities, the coincidences, because there's a lot of power in the present moment. So one of the key elements in the creative process is teaching people how to relax into the present moment. So if a person is thinking about their problems, and those problems are memories that are etched in their brain that are connected to certain people and objects and things at certain times and places, the moment they think about their problems, say first thing in the morning when they wake up, if you believe your thoughts have something to do with your destiny and your brain is a record of the past, the moment you remember your problems, you're thinking in the past. And because every problem has an emotion associated because you experience it, the moment you feel unhappy, now your body's in the past. So thoughts are the language of the brain and feelings are the language of the body. And how we think and how we feel creates our state of being. So most people unconsciously start their day with their entire state of being biologically in the past. And again, the body's so objective, it doesn't know the difference between the real life experience and the emotion that you're creating by thought alone. So that past, that familiar past, is called the known. And if you wake up in the morning and you start thinking about the predictable future and the people you have to see and the places you have to go and the things you have to do in your routine, predictable life, the same exact thing happens. You're imagining that future scenario that's already known to you, and you're anticipating the feeling of that outcome. So that becomes, the predictable future becomes the known as well. So if the familiar past is the known and the predictable future is the known, there's only one place where the unknown exists, and that's the sweet spot of the generous present moment. And teaching people how to create from the present moment is what begins to produce the magic and the changes that take place in their lives.
Because you made it this far in a video, I want to celebrate you. Most people start and don't finish. Most people never actually follow through. Most people say they want something, but they don't ever do the work to actually get it. But you are different. You are special. Believe Nation, you made it here all the way to the end, and I love you. So as a special celebration, if you put a hashtag believe down in the comments below on this video, I will showcase you and celebrate you somewhere on the screen in a future video because you are awesome. To learn about the law of attraction secrets, check the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
Then I'm going to feel so great. Well, then they're back to the program, waiting for it to happen, for them to feel the emotion. They're believing their outer world has to change in order for them to feel better. There's no